animal, meaning undomesticated, and it manifests in his loving to live in the wilderness, like an animal would. And at the same time, he also has the nature of a human being, the nature of a man. He's a pere Adam. He's an animal man. He's a man, but he's also got the nature in some ways of an undomesticated animal. Yeah, a little bit schizophrenic. And by the way, donkey is not a nice connotation in the Tanakh. Okay, most people who are keeping it clean for the recordings here, but most people who are described as donkeys were donkeys. Okay, that was their personality. So it's not like, oh, he's like, a lion, he has a kingly. No, he's being compared to a donkey, a wild animal, and it's not a nice comparison. Okay, so again, we feel a little bad for Hagar, but also we're finding out about the nature of Ishmael. By the way, Sforno's trying to explain why Ishmael would love the wilderness, as Rashi suggested, and animals love the wilderness. They don't want to live inside houses, right? They love to live out in the open spaces. Even domesticated animals may not love living inside houses, but they've gotten used to it. The Netziv actually makes notes a very specific distinction in the phrasing of the pasuk, which called him a pere Adam. And the Netziv says, Im nefarei shehu gadal b'midbar pra'i, right? Lehefech miva'e Adam pera. It should have called him an Adam pere, a man of the wilderness. Sheyehe mashma'o, and the connotation of Adam pere would have been ohev lihiyot b'midbar keperush Rashi. So the Netziv feels that Rashi's perush of a man who loves the wilderness isn't exactly what the pasuk is saying here. That would be Adam pere, and instead the Netziv picks up on the fact that the pasuk actually calls him a pere Adam. Netziv says, Aval pere Adam mashma'o shehu mafri et kol Adam. He makes other people pere. Okay, so not that he riles them up, but he's a mafri Adam. He treats other people with a wilderness type of treatment. And the Netziv goes on and he says, Ela hakol hefker upra'i etzlo. Everything's hefker. He looks at his interpersonal relationships. He looks at his, role in society, and to him it's all wild. It's without rules. And you can see that on Sefaria, the translator took this and put this into the context that we have here, that is oblivious to decorum, status, and the rules of society. So an Adam pere loves the wilderness. A pere Adam is in relationship to other people. He himself may or may not love the wilderness, but he looks at others and it's like a wilderness to him. The whole social infrastructure is like a wilderness, meaning it's hefker. There's no rules. It's chaotic. He doesn't care about the social order. He doesn't care what's socially acceptable. He doesn't care what's appropriate. So that's a little bit of a different twist, says the Netziv. And Rav Hirsch, in our source number 5, also picks up on this distinction. And Rav Hirsch starts the same way. He will not just be Adam pere. He's not just a man of the wilderness, a free man. Rav Hirsch gives a little bit of a different take, and he says he will be pere Adam, the pere of all Adam. He's not just a man of the wilderness or a free man. He is the freest of men. He is the pere of all Adam, the pere amongst mankind. And says Rav Hirsch, pere specifically designates being free from human yoke and from the constraint of cities, which is kind of what Netziv said, free of human yoke. He doesn't feel the need to behave like in a way that other humans feel the need to behave. We respect a certain social order, etiquette, a certain behavior that's considered appropriate. He's free from human yoke and from the constraints of cities, hence of wild animals that cannot bear the constraints of cities, where you might have a cat and a dog as a pet. There are certain animals that just won't be domesticated because they don't want to be constrained. Such a race of men who do not bow their necks to the yoke of other men or to the constraint of life in towns will your seed become against mankind. That's the bracha that the angel is giving Hagar. Your child, not just will your child be a free man or free of the yoke of human social normalcy, but the whole race of men that your son will be the forefather of will be a race of men who do not bow their necks to the constraints of life in towns. Right? The whole fundamental character, says Rav Hirsch, of the social life of the Ishmaelites is described by this one word, pere. They don't follow the rules. Okay, again, we're leaving modern politics out, okay, on purpose. That's someone else has more expertise in giving that shear. So he's got this nature where he's not bound by rules, and he doesn't want to be bound by rules, and he doesn't want to be bound by social order and by, social appropriateness and etiquette. He loves the wilderness. He's not comfortable in the constraints of cities. He likes the open spaces. He's a hunter. Those are four different things, but we can kind of see how Rashi, Sforno, Nitziv, and Rav Hirsch are kind of putting together this package of, before we even meet Ishmael, Hagar is finding out that this is going to be the nature of the child that she gives birth to. And that's a theoretical destiny, but it turns out that that is what happens when Ishmael becomes older. So if you turn to source 6 and you look at our Medrash Tanchuma, the Medrash says, Atamotse, what we find is Kisha Gadal Yishmael, that when Yishmael grows up, Yashav beparashat drachim v'haya milastem et habriot. He sat at the crossroads and he robbed everybody. Shene'emar v'hu yihyeh pera adam yado bekol. This was his destiny. So even though we can discuss in other places in Tanakh where somebody had a certain nature, we mentioned it even last week, that you can have a certain nature, but you can channel that nature into positive outlet or negative outlet. It turns out that Ishmael, whose nature is this free, lack of constraint, not following the rules, it turns out that Ishmael totally channels that in the most negative way possible. In the English, it says that he was also a murderer, but milastem et habriot, he let's even give him the benefit of the doubt that he was only stealing from people at the crossroads. Listim are, if you say Tfilat HaDerech when you travel, we ask Hashem to protect us from the Listim Baderech, from those who are sitting at the crossroads and trying to take advantage of our being travelers. Ishmael was that guy. Shene'emar v'hu yiyeh pera adam. We're going to skip 7 for now, but we're going to come back to it. I think I found, after I made the source sheet, I found a better place for it. So it fits in better. Okay? So this is not just something that we see in public, that out in the world, as parents, I think many of us have been at that place where at home our kids are, but out in public, the teachers rave about them and the other, their parents' friends, oh my gosh, what a lovely kid. And you're like, okay, and then everybody says the same line. At least they're behaving in public. If they have to let everything out, better they do that in private, and at least in public, they know the social mores. So we're seeing the opposite with Ishmael. In public, he's a pera adam. That's what the Medrash is trying to point out. But what about in private? So let's jump to source number 8, and let's see how he behaves at home. So source number 8 is now psukim from a little bit later in the story. Vatere Sarah et ben Hagar hamitzrit asher yalda leAvraham mitzachek. Sarah now has a child of her own. We've just fast forwarded a bunch of years. Okay, there's a 14-year age difference between Ishmael and Yatrak. So Ishmael's a 14-year-old. And Yitzchak is a child, or newborn, or maybe it's even he's 16 and Yitzchak is 2, right? Actually, that makes more sense. Sorry. The Torah just has revealed before source 8 that Yitzchak, the party has happened for Yitzchak being weaned. So he's probably 2 or 3 years old. So Ishmael's like 16, 17. Vatere Sarah et ben Hagar hamitzrit asher yalda la'Avraham mitzachek. And Sarah looks over and she sees Hagar's kid playing. Vatomer la'Avraham, and then she turns to Avram and she says, Garesh ha'ama hazot vet bena. Get rid of this maidservant and her son. Kilo yirash ben ha'ama hazot im beni im Yitzchak. Because that child is not going to inherit with my child Yitzchak. Okay, so we may know a famous Rashi. I promise we're going to get there. But let's focus on the pshat here. She sees the child playing and she goes, it's not good. Okay, what is it that Sarah sees Yishmael doing? What can Mitzachek really be telling us about this behavior of this child? Because according to the pshat, he's just playing. So what is it that irks Sarah, and more than irks her, that sets her off to banish Hagar and Yishmael, and this time it's going to be for good? So we have a bunch of different answers to the question, okay? And by the way, like another great shiur for another time would be the use of the shoresh tzadi chet kuf, tzachek, tzchok, yitzchak, mitzachek. Like it's all over these parshiot, right? Sarah laughs when she hears he's having Yitzchak. Avram laughs when he hears they name him Yitzchak. Then Yishmael is mitzachek, and then other people laugh at them. Tzchok asal Elokim. It's like a very recurring shoresh. So it would be very interesting. We don't have time for it tonight, but it'd be very interesting. Like, what are all the possible things that can mean, and how does that affect the story? But let's read a few possibilities. Let's think of a few ideas. with the help of our Mefarshim, what is it that Ishmael's doing that's so repulsive and repugnant to Sarah? So we'll start in Ibn Ezra, and he's pretty kind to Ishmael, and he says, mitzachek, he's playing. Ki kain minhag kol na'ar. He's acting like a 17-year-old boy, okay? As we learn later from Yosef, that's not always the greatest way to act. Yosef's also 17, and he's called an immature, and oh my gosh, he's such a 17-year-old. Okay, it may not be the greatest stage in the development of a boy, but he's playing like an older boy. And how does an older boy play with a younger boy? You know, he's teasing, he's showing off, he's lording his age and greater, strength and height, and, I'm better than you. It's competitive. Vatikanebo ba'avur heyoto gadol mi bina. And Sarah's like, it's making my son feel bad. He's only 2, 3, and look, I'm jealous on his behalf. He feels bad when Ishmael does that. So according to Ibn Ezra, this is a very lighthearted, maybe there's a competitive streak in Ishmael, maybe it's even an edgy competitive streak, but Sarah doesn't like it because she feels like this is not nice to her son. That's one option. Simple play, but it's, competitive play. Sforno, in source number 10, says, no, it's a little more than play. Mitzachek, malig. He was making fun of something. What was he making fun of? Al hamishte shena'aseh bebeit Avraham. He's like, oh, it's a big party for Yitzchak when he got weaned. Ke'amro shenit abra me Avimelech. This is actually a familiar taunt. We've never heard of Ishmael being the taunter. We've heard of it elsewhere, that there were people who were saying, after all these years, Sarah and Avram couldn't have children. Lo and behold, she spent a few minutes alone with Avimelech, and all of a sudden she's pregnant. Maybe Avimelech is the real father. Okay, that Rashi quotes that midrash elsewhere as this is what people were saying. Sforno says, well, guess who was also saying it? Ishmael to Yitzchak. Oh, Avram's not your father, right? So now it's getting a little more than just, it's, there's teasing, and then there's teasing. I tell this to my own children. There's teasing, and then you're teasing about something someone's sensitive about, or it could really be, a very sensitive subject. So that's not nice. Teasing happens. Teasing's never nice, but it gets a little hurtful when the teasing hits on a very sensitive spot. And this is a sensitive spot, especially when Sarah responds back in source 8, oh yeah, he's not sticking around for inheritance, because what if he actually challenges Yitzchak's parentage and says, well, I'm the only heir of Avraham? Right? So this now is getting more than teasing. It's getting edgy. It's getting very purposeful, and it's malicious. So questioning Yitzchak's parentage. Radak says, no, that's not what he was making fun of. Something else entirely. Mitzachek says, Radak, ki'ilu mal'ig al Yitzchak shenolad mehazakenim. Dude, your parents are old, right? It's like a taunt, but it's it makes Yitzchak feel bad. Right? Your parents are old. They were old when they had you. I don't know exactly what Ishmael meant when he went in that direction. I could see that being a taunt now. I could see younger kids, your parents are old, I don't know, maybe. But it seems, according to Radak, that this is a taunt with some edge. Okay, maybe not quite as malicious as the Sforno's approach, but definitely has an edge to it. Maybe he's implying that Yitzchak wasn't wanted in the same way. They waited so long to have you. You were an accident. We don't know exactly where, according to Radak, Ishmael is going, but it's not nice. And it's a put down of Avraham, and it's a put down of Sarah, and it's a put down in some way. Somehow, it's a put down of Yitzchak, even though he didn't choose what time to be born. Right? Let's, before we turn the page, go back to source number 7. Let's now look at the midrash in source 7, because now it gets a little more sinister. The midrash and then Rashi, who's going to follow on the heels of this midrash, start to see a little more in the word mitzachek than simple playing or teasing. Even the Sforno with the teasing that's got an edge, that's a little malicious, is still teasing. The midrash and then Rashi take this word mitzachek in a whole different direction. So the midrash says, Uma Talmud Lomar. The midrash gives us some good parenting advice. Chosek shivto sonei beno. Sparing the rod spoils the child. Okay. And the midrash says, how do we know that someone who spares discipline, we won't say the rod because that's not a thing anymore, right? But sparing discipline, actually that person hates their child. Right? If you love your child, you'll discipline them. So if you don't discipline them, you must hate them. Anyone who refrains from disciplining their son in the end causes their son to fall into evil ways, and they will come to hate their child for all the bad things that they do. Hate's a strong word. Shekain matzinu b'Yishmael shehayulo ga'aguim al Avraham aviv. right? We see this with Ishmael, who behaved wickedly in front of Avraham, velo ridahu. And Avraham, he really had a soft spot, and he wasn't the best disciplinarian. Veyatzal letarbut ra'ah, and Ishmael goes off the derech in such a bad way. Usana ehu vehotzio mi beito rekam. And ultimately, Avraham performs what looks like the hateful act of sending Ishmael away from the house empty-handed. Now, we know, P.S., that Sarah forces him to do that. He doesn't want to. We're going to get to those psukim soon. And Hashem tells Avraham, listen to Sarah. She knows what she's talking about. So it's not really, Avram's not sending Ishmael away out of hate. But it could be construed by Ishmael as hate. And that's where the Midrash is going. Ma asa Ishmael. What was so bad that Ishmael did that if only Avram would have disciplined him, maybe he wouldn't have done? Kishahaya ben chamesh esrei shana. So he was a 15-year-old, so Yitzchak was 1. Hitchil lahavit selem min hashuk. He began to bring home toy idols from the marketplace. V'haya mitzachek bo, and he would play with them. Ve'ovdo, and also worship them a little bit. Right? It was more than just play. He played with them. They were his trinkets, but also he started to believe in them. Kimoshe ra'a me'acherim, as he had seen others do. He observed the behavior of idol worshippers around him, and he said, looks interesting, and he started to bring home idols from the shuk. Now, Rashi's going to pick up on this idea, so you can already turn to source number 12 to get ready. But when I read this medrash, the thing that sticks like to me right away is, can you imagine Avraham, who smashed all the idols in his father's shop, and like he did this like massive life overhaul to get away from idolatry. He is the icon of smashing the idols. And like, it's not like we're talking about like 5-10 generations. His son is bringing home idols from the marketplace. Like, that's hard. You know, I mean, I'm putting it mildly, but I keep like feeling this like empathy for Avraham in that situation. That's not our point tonight, but I think it's fascinating to envision Ishmael like just so quickly turning back to something. And I think we can probably think of examples in real time also where, you know, someone became more affiliated with their Judaism and, Balei Tshuva, and maybe their children didn't stick with it. It would be equally difficult to say, I worked so hard to attain this value, and it's so hard for me to see that my children are going against those values. But the image of the idols and the smashing, and then every idol Avram smashed, Ishmael bought from the shuk, like, to me, that's just such a compelling image. So the Medrash says, well, one second, he was doing mitzachek, he was playing with idols, he was doing idolatry. Okay, that could explain Sarah's extreme reaction. She sees him playing, and the Torah conveniently leaves out what he's playing with. But if it is idols, you can now understand why Sarah might say, okay, well, this growing up together, not going to work. My son is going to be the next Avraham, and like he's not going to live in a house of idolatry, right? We've worked so hard to move away from that. That's not the kind of environment we want to raise Yitzchak in, so we can understand Sarah's response. Rashi agrees and goes a step further than the Medrash. Rashi says, we see the word mitzachek or litzachek, right, the shoresh, used elsewhere in Tanakh to show the 3 big sin actions. So says Rashi, Lashon Avodah Zarah, Kimoshe ne'emar vayakumu litzachek. Number 1, when the Jews get up and worship the golden calf, the Torah says, and they got up litzachek. Rashi says, oh, so litzachek means to worship idols. That's the verb used when the Jews worship the golden calf. So litzachek is a way of saying that they were worshiping idols. Davar acher, alternatively, lashon gilui arayot. This can refer to immoral sexual relationships. Kima detema litzachek bi. Right? It could be the way Eshet Potiphar accuses Yosef of rape by saying, Re'u hevi lanu ish ivri litzachek, like, right? That he was making fun of me, but really she's accusing him of immoral sexual conduct. So the word litzachek bi, can be refer to immoral conduct. Davar acher, alternatively, lashon ritzicha can refer to murder. Big 3, avodah zarah, gilui arayot, and shvichut damim, murder. Kimo yakumu naha ne'arim v'yisachaku lefaninu. Lisachek and litzachek are close enough, okay, root-wise, shoresh-wise in Hebrew. So when in Sefer Shmuel, when the guys on team Avner and guys on team Yoav, the David versus the Shaul teams, decide they're going to have a game, and the game turns into a fight to the death. So maybe, says Rashi, litzachek is a euphemism or a term for murder, because that's what happens. They say, hey guys, let's have a game. And it's like the Romans had games, right? The gladiators. It wasn't a game. Someone died at the end. And that's sort of what's happening in Sefer Shmuel. And Rashi's saying, well, we have an example of litzachek referring to murder. So maybe Ishmael's guilty of murder. Shehaya meriv im Yitzchak. And now Rashi gives sort of like a fourth opinion. What was this fighting over between Yitzchak and Ishmael? Shehaya meriv im Yitzchak al hayerusha. No surprise, they're fighting over the inheritance, right? The bechora, the birthright, because it says it here. Sorry, va'omer, Yishmael was saying to Yitzchak, ani bechor, v'notel pishnayim. I'm the bechor, so I get double. V'yotzim basadeh, and they went out to settle it in the field, as boys do. V'notel kashto vayore bo chitzim. And Yishmael took his famous bow and arrow, and he shot arrows towards Yitzchak. He missed, luckily, but he was attempting to murder him. So it's not really a fourth answer. Rashi's explaining, well, what would he murder him over? Oh, well, the same thing Cain murdered Hevel over last week. The same thing Esav wants to murder Yaakov over, and the same thing the brothers want to murder Yosef over, right? The Bechorah, the birthright, the double inheritance, the status of being the Bechor. Okay, so we can argue that Rashi has four answers. What's the sin? Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayot, and Shvichut Damim, and also that the mitzachek is a fight over the birthright. That's really part of the murder answer. Why does he want to murder Yitzchak? Could be over the birthright. Okay, so Rashi also says, this is not like, oh, they're playing and it got out of hand. This is an intense thing about Ishmael that Sarah happens to notice before Avraham. That was source 8, the Psukim in source 8. Vatere Sarah, I turned to the wrong page, just going back so I don't quote it wrong. Vatere Sarah et ben Hagar hamitzvit asher yalda la'Avraham mitzachek. Sarah sees the writing on the wall with Yishmael, especially if it's something so serious. And Rav Hirsch explains in source 13, he agrees in principle with this idea of Rashi. He just makes it a little more philosophical. This is such an interesting idea, I think. He took in just as much of the great ideas of Avraham to make him ironically disdain them. You know, like it takes a lot of chachma to be a Rasha. We always talk about that on Pesach. You know, the Rasha is just as smart as the chacham. He's just using it for the bad, not for the good. You know, sinister evil comes from a great intellect. You know, you can do bad things and not be a great intellect, but real sinister evil comes from a great intellect. So says Rav Hirsch, Yishmael knew and understood Avraham's philosophies so well that he was able to disdain them. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, that sounds great. It was like, let me poke holes in Avraham's arguments. And over that which the world in general greeted merely with tzchok, everyone else also laughed at Avraham, tzchok, in which derision was only lightly mixed. They're like, oh, Avraham, you and your monotheism, silly. Yishmael was completely mitzachek. That wasn't like light derision. It was anger. It was rejection of Abraham's philosophies. He was undermining Abraham's philosophies and was therefore completely unfit to join with Yitzchak in the heritage of Abraham. He didn't agree with Abraham's philosophies. Maybe his philosophies of chesed, maybe his philosophies of hachnasat orchim, maybe his philosophies of monotheism. If he's doing avodah zarah, then that's for sure true. So he doesn't agree with Abraham's philosophies. Sarah says, okay, fine, but then this is not your place. In this house, we agree with this philosophy, and if you don't, then this isn't the place for you. I was going to say it's amazing in our story, and also if we kind of remember to the story, I guess we'll get to this next week when we talk about Esav, with the story of Rivka, who also has inside intel that Yaakov's going to be greater. Sarah has inside intel. She sees before Avraham sees. But if he's literally playing with idols, I guess our next question is, how do we then, did Avraham not see it? Because if we look at source 14, when Sarah says, Garesha ta'ama hazot, they're out. This is not going to work, and this is not going to taint my child Yitzchak. Vayira hadavar me'od be'inei Avram alo dot beno. Avram's very upset with this plan. He does not want to kick Ishmael out. It's his son, but again, does he not see, like, how is it possible that Avraham lives in the same house and has no inkling that Ishmael is yotzei letarbut ra'ah. I'm not saying we would kick out in our day and time a child who's struggling, but again, we're talking about a time where actions were almost like, paradigms of actions. It wasn't just a family story like we said last week, but we're talking about like, the birth of a nation. So like, how does Avraham not see that Ishmael is coming into conflict with the philosophies that Avraham has worked so hard to instill in his household? And what's the deal? I do get the distress as a parent, and that's for sure one approach, just he's distressed as a parent. But look at what Rav Hirsch says. He says in source number 15, this whole affair seemed to Avraham to be extremely bad, harsh, ra. What Sarah had noticed has surely not escaped the notice of Avraham. Of course he noticed, says Rav Hirsch. But Avraham might have been thinking, if here at home Yishmael has already become lost to all seriousness and has become mitzachek, and Hagar's influence, although certainly partly countered by Avram's influence, has already become so powerful, what will become of the boy when they are both far away from here and Yishmael is given over completely to Hagar's influence? In other words, if he's already going off the derech at home, how do I let him go out into the world where there's no chance that I can influence him positively? At least if I keep him here, says Avraham, there's a chance that he can do teshuvah. So why does it distress Avraham? Not because he's blind to Yishmael's faults, but because he believes in Yishmael that there is a way back. That's fascinating of Rav Hirsch. And in fact, we see that this actually bears out in the psukim. So I did this psukim not all in a row because actually they're not, I don't want to say they're out of order. They're in the order of the story, but in terms of understanding Yishmael's persona like we are tonight, we have to go back and forth a little. So look at source number 16, which happened already before Avraham sent him away. Vayomer Avraham el ha'elokim. Avram just found out in this source 16 that Yitzchak is going to be his heir. Ki b'Yitzchak yikarei lecha zera. Yitzchak's the man. No offense to any other children that Avraham might have. Vayomer Avram el ha'elokim, and Avraham's gut response is, Lu Yishmael yichya lefanecha, but like, will Yishmael still be allowed to live? And that's a weird question because nobody said he had to die. God responds, Vayomer Elokim, I'm going to say it in English quickly because I'm looking at the time. Nevertheless, Sarah will bear you a son. You shall name him Yitzchak, and I will maintain my covenant with him. Right? Yitzchak's the man. As for Yishmael, I hear you, says God. I hear your prayer, and I hereby bless him. I will make him fertile and exceedingly numerous. He will be the father of 12 chieftains, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant, this Jewish thing that's happening, I will maintain with Yitzchak, whom Sarah will bear to you at this season next year. You're not even pregnant with Yitzchak, but you will a year from now have him, and I'm just telling you that's the son you want to focus on. But I hear you. You're afraid Ishmael is going to die. We'll see what that means in a second. So I hear you. I'll bless him. He will live. He will have 12 children. And the Or HaChaim in source 17 says, what is this prayer? Yechavein b'tfila zu sheyihyeh Yishmael holech b'tzedek lifnei Hashem. He's not asking, can he live physically? He's asking, will he ever be a tzaddik again? Can he live a righteous life? And he goes through a whole thing, how tzaddikim are called chayim. Lu Yishmael yichyeh, please let Ishmael live, says the Or HaChaim, means please let him be righteous. So even before Sarah notices the mitzachik and the avodah zara and the other bad qualities and sends him away, and we see that Avram wants to try to save his neshama, Avram was already worried about Ishmael's neshama, and he says, please, God, let him be a tzaddik. And God says, I hear you and I'm blessing you. And if you look at source 18, the Or HaChaim continues and he says, God told Avraham that Ishmael would eventually become a Baal Tshuva, since Avraham had prayed for Ishmael to develop into a God-fearing person. This was the meaning of, I'll bless him, right? Ramazlo Hashem sheyachazor b'tshuva. God says to him, Beirachti oto, and that's the answer to Avram's prayer. You want him to become a tzaddik, says God? You're on. He will do tshuva. And he does. If you look at source 19, it's like nice to end on a nice note. Last week we didn't end on such a nice note. But if you look at source 19, later on in Yishmael's life, at the end of Avram's life, source 19, Vayigva vayamat Avraham b'seva tova. Okay, it's about Yitzchak's born when Avram's 100. He dies at 175. So like Ishmael disappears off the scene of the story for like a good 75 years. We see him when Yitzchak's 2 or 3. So a good 72 years. And then Avram dies. Zakein v'seva, he had a great life. Vayasef el amav, vayikberu oto Yitzchak v'Yishmael banav. And Yishmael reappears to bury Avraham. And the Medrash, the Gemara, picks up on the fact that the order of the brothers is wrong here. Vayikberu oto Yitzchak v'Yishmael. And by rights, by age order, it should have said Yishmael v'Yitzchak. And in fact, when Esav and Yaakov come together to bury Yitzchak, it says Esav v'Yaakov. Even though Yaakov had the Bechorah, Yaakov had the blessing, Yaakov was chosen, when they come back to bury Yitzchak, it's Esav v'Yaakov. So why here, says the Gemara, is the order switched? Yitzchak v'Yishmael. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, this shows us, says the Gemara, Yishmael asa tshuva b'chayei aviv. He's accepted Yitzchak's superiority and precedence over him, and that, says the Gemara, is showing you that he did teshuvah. When they come to bury their father, he's a changed man. I'm rushing a little because of time. I really want to get to the end. If you actually look at source 21, we see Ishmael one more time. Ve'ela shnei chayei Yishmael, at the end of his own life, me'at shana ushloshim shana ve'sheva shanim. He lives to 137. Vayigva vayamat ve'yasef el amav. And if you note the phrasing of his death, it's exactly the same as Abraham's in source 19. Vayigva vayamat ve'yasef el amav. He expired, he died, and he was gathered to his people, to his brethren. Says Rashi, lo ne'emra gviya ela betzadikim. You know, that formula for stating someone's death in the Torah, that's only used for tzadikim. Vayigva vayamat ve'yasef el amav. That's the formula to describe tzaddikim. So Rashi agrees. Rashi's the guy who said, Avodah Zarah, Shvichus Damim, Gili Arayos. Rashi says, end of his life, by the time he died, he is being written up as a tzaddik. So we have one last question for our 4 minutes. And that is, okay, so why doesn't he get written back into the Jewish story? He does tshuva. He's great. He's come around. Avram davened for him to be righteous, a tzaddik. Whatever was in his nature, he somehow learned how to channel. He reformed his ways. The Gemara agrees. Rashi agrees. The Psukim seem to be saying Ishmael really ended his life on a high note. So why does he still get left out of the Jewish story? That's sort of the question we'll end with. And you have to read this, Rav Hirsch. It's fascinating. I think it's a great message to us. Says Rav Hirsch, the nation descended from Avraham and Hagar, in other words, the Yishmaelim, is 1/2 Jewish. On Avram's side, God has given us, the Jewish nation, a mission which has a dual aspect. I love this piece. Emunah, theoretical truths which we have to accept and which our minds are to develop, and the law, the commandments which in harmonious agreement with these truths form our whole life in accordance with the dictates of the divine will. So we have faith, and then we have rules by which we can express our faith and make it concrete. On the one aspect, the theoretical one, the Arabic nation holds high place in the ranks of mankind. It has developed the Abrahamic thoughts of one God with such fine acuteness that the thoughts of the unity of God, in the words of Jewish theological philosophers, as far as they are developed philosophically, rest predominantly on the works of Arabian writers. The Arab nations got monotheism, they nailed it. Their faith, their belief, their philosophies, 100% are correct. They got it. In fact, we borrow a lot from them philosophically. We can admire them philosophically in how committed they are in their monotheistic beliefs and their allegiance to one God. They have the emunah, but not the mitzvot. It is not sufficient to have spiritual thoughts of the unity of God. To Shema, we say Shema, that's the expression of our faith, must be added ve'ahavta, the actual practical, how do we show that faith? We have mitzvot. We have to show God by loving him, and that's doing mitzvot. The practical submission of all forces and efforts b'chol lev, nefesh, u'ma'ud. And for that, it is not sufficient only to be begotten and brought up by an Avraham. For that, one must also be born from a Sarah. The specific people of Avraham is not given the mission to be the theological, philosophical herald of the unity of God, but lishmor derech Hashem la'asot tzedakah u'mishpat, action. And that requires the submission of all one's forces, and above all one's sensuous forces, urges, and impulses, that demands the dedication of the body. One only begins to be a Jew with the dedication of all the senses of the body. Ishmael has the dedication of the mind from Abraham, but he lacks the dedication of the life of his senses from Sarah. And I thought that was fascinating, because having your faith in the right place and your beliefs in the right place and your, my emunah is strong is amazing. And it's only half the battle. Spiritual thoughts, and I just think this is a lesson to us. We're done here now talking about Ishmael, but I think that one of the takeaways for us could be that, like Ishmael, we can't, we have to work on our faith. But the whole thing of doing mitzvot is faith without mitzvot. That's not what Judaism really is asking from us. It's asking a little bit more. It's asking us to put that faith into the form of mitzvot. And that's where Yitrak and Ishmael, as righteous as Ishmael may have been at the end of his life, that's where the path for Ishmael diverges, and Yitrak has to carry the legacy forward. And that's a legacy that we still carry in our own time today. Thank you so much. I'm going to finish here.
Thank you so much, Ms. Torah. We'll begin in a moment. We'll give you a little breather in between, so take a moment, and we'll start momentarily. How are you, Rita?
The Shulno's family was operated that part.
Yeah, I tried to go there on Friday. He wasn't home.
Oh.
Yeah, I went on
Because I
Friday.
asked her the Shulno's, and she said she didn't say anything.
I went on Friday. There was no answer, and I left a message, but I didn't get back, so I'll try again. You try. We'll be in touch. Okay, we're going to begin in a moment. Let's see. That is better. Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for participating in our Midrashah, the third and final shir for this evening, but each and every week, our amazing Midrashah, which is named for an extraordinary woman, a young woman who, as you know, left our community and left this world way, way, way too young. Our Midrashah is dedicated in her memory, and today was her third Yahrzeit, Daniela Sarah Bas Eliezer Yisrael Halevi, Mrs. Danny Greyjour. Danny, or Mrs. Greyjour, was an extraordinary person by every measure. Tremendously humble and modest, brilliant, smart, funny, witty. She had a Yira Shemayim, a tremendous faith in Hashem, and demonstrated it with her Yira Shemayim that she lived with on a regular basis. She was an outstanding teacher. I know my own children benefited from being in her classroom. The level of confidence and belief she had in all of her students, and that she transformed them and she lifted them and she made them believe in themselves. The Mesiras Nefesh, the effort that she expressed to make each of them succeed, writing separate tests. What teachers want to grade or write any test? She wrote separate tests for different students, understanding their individual needs. And the list could go on, but we are tremendously honored and grateful to be able to have our Midrashah, our women's learning in our community, in her memory, named after her, as we mark this third Yahrzeit, Daniela Sarah Bas Eliezer Yisrael Halevi. We hope that our words and all the learning tonight and each and every Monday night, all the women's learning in the Danny Greyjour Women's Midrashah should elevate her neshama, that she's having nachas ruach, looking down and seeing all that learning which is taking place. And I want to express our collective gratitude to the Epstein family, the Greyjour families, for their generosity in enabling all of that learning and all that they do, and for all of their support. We are forever and tremendously grateful. Okay, tonight our goal, in a relatively short time, is to sort through the laws of Borer. See what we did there? Okay, thank you. Laws of Borer are one of the 39 categories of creative labor. The Torah tells us, Torah doesn't explicitly tell us, in fact, the Torah only names one of the forbidden acts of Shabbos, but tells us we're not allowed to do malachas on Shabbos. Previously, we've shared a general introduction to how do we know what those categories are and what fits into them. I don't want to review the entire thing and take our time now, other than to summarize and succinctly say that whatever was defined as creative labor to build the Mishkan, the great tabernacle, whatever was creative labor to give a house to Hashem, to make a dwelling place for the Shekhinah, is considered creative labor that we rest from on Shabbos. Hashem says, imitate me. It's the finest form of flattery. 6 days, says God, I created, I manipulated the world, I conquered the world. The seventh day, I was comfortable with the world, I let nature be. And I want you to do the same. For 6 days, conquer a world. For 6 days, go make a difference in this world. And that seventh day, be at peace with nature. What does it mean to be at peace with nature? We still have to live, we still have to eat, we still have to operate, we still have to walk to shul, we still have to. So how do we know what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do? So our rabbi said, look at what went into building the Mishkan, and you'll know what you're not allowed to do, what it means to be at rest. What was created, what was considered a creative labor to build that structure for Hashem is the same definition of a creative labor that we abstain from, that we refrain from, in order to connect from Hashem, in order to connect to Hashem on Shabbos, and to be at peace with the natural world around us. There are lamites malachos, there are 39 categories of such creative labor. There are archetypes, the avos of those categories, and toldos. Each category has subcategories that are the same totzah, even if they're a different pa'ula. They have the same result, even if they undergo a different action in order to achieve that result. So what defines, what was the common theme of all these 39 things? So many of the achronim, many of the commentators explain, what I've always found most meaningful is the following. Whatever is uniquely human, whatever takes human ingenuity, human creativity, human thought, human discipline, that's what you're not allowed to do. What an animal could do, what an animal instinct, an animal impulse, an animal would know on its own to do, that you're allowed to do on Shabbos. So each of these 39 categories we have, first 13 we call Sidur Depas, all the process of making bread, from plowing, planting, and harvesting, and threshing, and winnowing, and ultimately baking. All of these are things that human beings do. Animals eat food that is prepared, that grows from the ground. Animals kill other animals that eat them. But an animal never puts on an apron and goes to a challah bake. An animal doesn't participate in a process of planting and harvesting and winnowing and kneading and so on and so forth. So all the 39 categories are creative labor. They are not just labor. If labor were forbidden on Shabbos, then the Jews of Boca couldn't walk to shul in July and August. You wouldn't be able to move furniture. You wouldn't be able to serve a big meal with lots of guests if labor were forbidden. Labor is not what's forbidden on Shabbos. Creative labor is what is forbidden, and we define creative labor as uniquely human. There's one exception to that rule. Of these 39 categories, there is one where you'll say to yourself, even an animal could do that. Anyone know which one that is? No, that's the one we're going to talk about tonight, but no. Totzah, to carry from one domain to another, which is why it's called the malacha grua. It's a different malacha, it's a different level malacha than the others, because an animal can put something in its mouth and carry it from a private area to a public area. There's no human ingenuity or creativity. So you understand, this is so critical to understand and understand the Hilchos Shabbos. Because otherwise, what do you mean? I can walk to shul, I could serve a meal and schwitz, but I can't flip on a light switch? Flipping on a light switch takes no work. I don't break any sweat. How come I'm not allowed to turn on a light switch, but I can walk to shul? The answer is, an animal can walk to shul, but it took a human being to invent electricity, to create an electric flow, to close a circuit, to ignite a light, to invent the light bulb. All of that is uniquely human. So all of that is the introduction to appreciate that what we're going to talk about is not just minutia, it's not just details, it's not there to take away our happiness or joy, it's not there to create arbitrary restrictions. It's all there because there's a system. We're trying to rest from creative labor, we're trying to be at peace with the natural world, we're trying to imitate God by being at rest. So one of those categories of 39 is borer. It's not only one, actually. There are several categories which all reflect different forms of separating, several avos malachos, but they're really all the same, which is to sort and to distinguish and to break apart is a uniquely human activity. Animals don't do that. It takes human ingenuity to identify the different values, to know what I want from what I don't want, what has value and what doesn't have value, and then to exercise the process of separating, of distinguishing between them is uniquely, or is a human ingenuity, and is a human act of conquering nature, and therefore it is a biblical prohibition. Borer is an issa d'oraisa. To give it a context, turning on the light is a rabbinic prohibition, significant, enormous. We are strict with it, but according to most opinions, a rabbinic prohibition. But if you take the wrong jelly beans out of the mixture of jelly beans, you violated a biblical prohibition. If you did it on purpose, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, it was a capital punishment. If you did it by accident, you had to bring a korban chatas. So just to understand it in a sense of context. In fact, the Mishnah Berurah, the Chavetz Chaim, in his introduction to Siman Shimon Test to the laws of Borer, chapter 319 in Shulchan Aruch, he says, we're playing with fire. This is an Issa D'Oraisa. And many people, because it just seems, what's the difference? Which order I take the jelly beans? If I take the skin off the chicken, what's the difference if I, all the other examples we'll use. If I use a slotted spoon, what's the difference if can I make French press coffee? What's the difference? It doesn't feel significant, like driving or a light switch or cooking. So says the Chavetz Chaim, because people are lax and people aren't careful, therefore he gives, unlike any other malacha, he gives a lengthy and a comprehensive introduction to set it up, because many people are not familiar with it. So the Talmud tells us, and again, we could study Borer in our Smichas Charver program. So grateful to Ravel Yada Goldvech. Some of the questions and answers we'll share tonight come from that program on Sunday Mornings for Men, a beautiful program. We trace it back to the Pasuk, the Gemara, the debate among the Rishonim, different opinions among the Achronim, among the Poskim. But for tonight, as I've often been encouraged, let's go to the bottom line. Not because anyone here is incapable of that same journey through that process, and we should have opportunities to study in that way as well. But I know that the goal tonight is, what is the bottom line? What can I do? What can I not do? Don't confuse me. Keep it simple. So the Gemara tells us there are three conditions, which if you meet these three conditions, you've not violated Borer. And they are known as biyad, miyad, ochel mitoch psos. If I were a real teacher, like Mrs. Grayshauer, I'd have a whiteboard and a marker. I'd be writing these three things down. But I'm just a rabbi. I'm not a real teacher. So the three things are ochel mitoch psolas. If you take what you want from what you don't want. So let's say there's a mixture, because this is the classic case of borer. You have a mixture, a bowl that is a mixture of jelly beans. And you have all kinds of colors in the jelly beans. So you love, let's say, the yellow ones, the popcorn ones. Those are the best jelly beans. Anyone get jelly bellies here? Popcorn ones, they're delicious. You don't like the black licorice ones. Those nobody likes. No, you don't want those. Except Penny. They're delicious, they're yummy, they're fantastic. So, good, very good. So that's a perfect example of the subjectivity of the laws of Borer. For me, if I were to take my mixture of jelly bellies, and I don't like the black licorice, so I sit and I take out all the black ones, so I'm left with the rest of the jelly beans, I violated a biblical prohibition, capital crime. If Penny does that because she loves those jelly beans, then it's permissible. At least she's met the one criteria of ochel from solas. So how do you define ochel, what you want edible, from solas? It's not edible and inedible, because all the jelly beans are edible. Some consider the black licorice barely edible, but they're all edible. So they're all edible, but there's a subjectivity. What I want is ochel. What I don't want is considered the psolas, is considered in this context what I am dismissing. It's considered the inedible. So three criteria where if I do them, it's not a problem of borer. I have to take what I want from what I don't want. I have to do it miyad, for immediate use. I can't be doing it in advance or for later. And I have to do it biyad. I have to do it without a special instrument for sorting or selecting. If those three criteria are met, it's not borer. What are the three criteria again? Biyad. I can't do it with a kli, with a vessel for sorting or selecting. I can't use a sieve, or I can't use a strainer, slotted spoon we'll get to, and a tea bag we'll get to in a moment, and a fork. Is that for selecting? We'll get to. But I have to do it biyad. I can't use a special utensil. I have to do it miyad, for immediate use. I can't be doing it for later. And I have to be taking what I want from what I don't want. Which begs the question the Chavetz Chaim and Mishnah Berurah wonders. Since when do we have a malacha that if you do these three things, it's not a malacha? If you put it in the oven in this way, at this time, in this whatever, then you're not cooking. No, a malacha is a malacha. If it's forbidden, it's forbidden. Where do we have an example where something that is forbidden, if you do it these three things, then it's not forbidden? then why isn't it borer? Is it borer or is it not borer? So Chavetz Chaim explains a very important principle. Shabur explains. He says, if you meet these three criteria, it's not derech breira, it's derech achila. If you meet these three criteria, you're not engaged in sorting. You're eating every time you eat. If you really couldn't eat, let's say you're looking at the chicken and you cut off the piece of chicken you want to put in your mouth next. So you're taking what you want from what you don't want, so to say. You're doing it immediately. You're about to put it in your mouth, and you're doing it without a special utensil, either with your hand or a fork, according to most, as an extension of your hand. That's eating. That's not called sorting. Nobody watching you sit and eat will say, you're undergoing a sorting, selecting process. They would say, I'm watching you eat, which is annoying when anyone watches you eat. So hopefully they're not watching you eat. But someone seeing a person doing that, taking what they want, putting it immediately, and using without a special utensil would call that eating. When you introduce a special utensil, when you're doing something to plan for later, when you're separating what you don't want from what you want, now you're not eating, now you're doing derech breira, now you're doing something in the style or with the intention of sorting and selecting, and that's what is prohibited. So I want to go through and define these three areas a little bit more clearly, and then we'll go to practical examples of borer in our life. Happy to take any questions. The goal is to enhance and to elevate our Shabbos observance in this area in general. So biyad. The first is biyad. So are you allowed to, what does it mean biyad? Do you literally have to do it with your hand? Let's say, you are you lived recently through a pandemic, you're living through a pandemic, and you don't want to touch all the jelly beans to take out the ones you don't want. So you're going to use a spoon as an extension of your hand. Are you now using an instrument? By the way, you can't just meet one or two out of the criteria. In order for it to not be borer, you have to meet all three criteria. So if you're using an instrument to eat immediately and take what you want from what you don't want, it's still borer. If you're doing it for later and you're doing it with your hand and what you want from what you don't want, it's still borer. If you're taking what you don't want, but you're doing it immediately without an instrument, it's still borer. You have to meet all three criteria to be eating, not sorting. All three have to be met. So it's very important. So according to most, in this context, the spoon or a fork, let's say when you stab the piece of chicken you want to eat next, or you're cutting away the piece of meat you want to eat next, you have a piece of meat, a piece of flesh, a piece of flank, and a piece of meat in front of you. And you're sitting at the Shabbos table, you're eating it. It's got a little fat, it's got a bone. There's several components to the meat. Maybe it's got a vein. Some people eat that. I can't deal with that. So I'm always cutting around it. So again, why isn't that sorting? Why isn't that borer? The answer is the fork there is not a sorting instrument. According to Reb Moshe, it might be, but I told you I'm not going to do that, so I'm just going to give you some bottom line. This fork in that context is not a sorting instrument. What is the fork? It's an extension of my hand. I don't want to get my fingers greasy and dirty. I can't grab the meat I want well. The fork pierces the meat. So the fork in that context is an extension of my hand. The fork is not acting as a sorting or selecting instrument. What happens in the following other examples? Let's say I have a tea kettle, where at the end of the tea kettle, there's a little filter on the spout of the tea kettle, so that if there are tea leaves floating around in my tea kettle, when I pour the tea, only the tea comes out and the leaves are held back from the filter. Is that considered a sorting vessel? I'm lacking one of the three criteria, therefore it's sorting, not eating. Will that be a problem? So according to Moshe Feinstein, it would be a problem. According to Shlomo Zalman, the Chazon Ish, and the Rav Yosef and others, if you're doing a derech achila, the primary purpose of the tea kettle is to heat the water, make the tea, hold and store the tea, and be able to serve the tea. It happens to have a filter, but it's not a vessel that's designated for sorting or selecting. So technically, they would allow you to do it. However, most people are strict to follow Reb Moshe. If there's a spout at the end and it's holding back the tea leaves, not to use it. Similarly, a salt shaker with rice. We live in a very humid climate here in South Florida in Boca Raton, and some people, and because of the humidity, will put rice inside the salt shaker. Somehow, magically, if there's rice in your salt shaker, the salt does not cling to itself. I saw the Kaf HaChaim says that a woman should be responsible for putting the salt on the table on Shabbos, because that will atone for Lot's wife in last week's Parsha, who turned around and turned into a pillar of salt. So we atone for that mistake, that a woman should take responsibility, Kaf HaChaim, which she's taking responsibility in most cases for most of the things on the table, so it shouldn't be a surprise, but that shouldn't be. We should all help, and we should take responsibility, and so on and so forth, yada, yada, yada. So the salt shaker with the rice. So the rice is preventing the salt from clinging, but however, the top of the salt shaker has little holes, and the rice can't fit through those holes. So now when you sprinkle salt, not that anyone's food here would need you to add salt, but if you were to sprinkle salt because you took it in from somewhere else and you had to add some salt, is that sorting or selecting with a vessel designated for sorting or selecting? So again, Rav Moshe would say yes. These other opinions, the Chazon Ish, Shlomo Zalman, Yalkut Yosef would say no, you're just sprinkling salt. There happens to be rice. That's not a vessel for sorting. However, the custom again is to be strict. Your salt shaker for Shabbos, the custom is to be strict without rice in it. What about the tea bag? The tea bag has the tea leaves in the tea bag. The tea bag essentially is a little mini strainer. It's an adorable, cute little mini strainer. That's what it is. It lets you soak your tea bag in the water. We're not talking about how to properly make tea on Shabbos right now. It's its own subject. Kli shlishi, tea sense. That's also a machlokes of Moshe Chazon Ish. However you make the tea, let's assume that you can make the tea with a tea bag in a kli shlishi, in a third vessel. So I've got my hot water urn, and I release water from the hot water urn into 1 cup. The hot water urn is the kli rishon, the primary vessel. The water comes out and goes into the first cup, which is the second vessel. I pour from the first cup into a second cup. So the second cup is the third vessel. The urn, cup 1, cup 2. Cup 2 is really vessel number 3. At least according to Rav Moshe, vessel number 3 can't cook. Kli shlishi can't cook. And therefore I could put anything I want inside of it. I could put raw chicken. I could put raw noodles. I could put raw baby cereal. I could put tea, according to Rav Moshe. Not everybody agrees, but according to Rav Moshe, and that is the generally assumed opinion, I think the most American follow that opinion of Moshe, that a kli shlishi can't cook. Anything raw even can be put inside a kli shlishi. It does not have the potency or the power to be able to cook. So I put my tea bag in my kli shlishi, and I got my little string, and I'm hopping and bopping my tea bag, and it's flavoring my water, and my water is now strong enough with tea. Some people leave the tea bag in there. You can have a 3-hour conversation. They're still sipping from the cup. They never took the tea bag out. I never understood that. Tea gets pretty intense, no? Okay, that's the minhag somehow. So I like to take the tea bag when it's just like the 3 bears, when it's just right, when it has just enough flavor of the tea. How do you take the tea bag out? When you lift the string and the tea bag is now held over the teacup, isn't it functioning as a strainer? Isn't that borer? Isn't that borer? So according to Rav Moshe, it's absolutely borer. According to these others, again, this is derech achila, not derech breira. So technically, maybe it's permissible. To be machmir, the general consensus custom is to take the tea bag out with a spoon. Why would it help to take the tea bag out with a spoon? So we'll get to this more in a moment, but when I take the tea bag out with a spoon, have I separated or sorted? No. You know what I did? I took the whole mixture out. The tea bag and the tea leaves had been mixed with water. When I take it out with a spoon, it's still mixed with water. So I put it in the garbage, or I put it on the little plate that'll go in the garbage, and I take it out with a spoon. What you certainly cannot do, according to everybody, according to those other opinions, strictly speaking, you probably could take out the tea bag and quickly put it down on the plate. You're not trying to sort anything. What everyone agrees you cannot do, which many people during the weekday do because we're so stingy or careful or positive or negative, however you want to look at it. What's the minhag? Take it out with, you take the spoon, you hold this string, you squeeze, you get every last drop out of that tea bag before you're going to put it in the garbage. That is an active process. That's an issa d'oraisa. To use the tea bag and to squeeze out of the tea bag is probably schita, told of dash, it's borer. You could probably check off several things you're doing wrong by doing that. So as tempting as it is, as hard as it will be to not squeeze out every drop of tea from the bag on Shabbos, just let it go. Shabbos, we let it go. Nothing bothers us, even leaving those extra drops in the tea bag. So taking it out and squeezing it against something, that's for sure going to be a problem of borer, a problem of schita, several problems. So again, the custom, the practice that most have to be strict is to use a spoon to take the tea bag out. And by doing that, it's not that you are one of the 3 criteria. By doing that, you're not even in the same ballpark as borer. Why? There's no mixture. Let's take a step back for a moment. In order to violate borer, you have to be sorting or selecting from a mixture. If there's no mixture, there's no borer. So let's say I have a chumash next to a siddur, next to a tehillim. They're 6 inches apart from each other. If I take one, am I violating sorting or selecting? No, they're not mixed together. But if I have a big pile of books in which they're all mixed, and that's even a question, Sfardim hold that books can never be in a mixture. Books by definition are distinct units. They're never mixed together. But Ashkenazim hold they are mixed, and I would encourage you to look in the main shul after Shacharis on Shabbos morning and look on the cart of the custodians when they collect all the chumashim and siddurim, different types of siddurim, and it looks like a big mixture. So if something is a mixture, then it's a candidate to violate borer. If it's not mixed together, if it's not in a mixture, there is no borer. So one of the ways that you can avoid borer is take the whole mixture. So for example, there's a fly in my soup. Now, if there's a fly in your soup, in my opinion, spill out the whole soup. You don't want to get the fly out and eat the rest of it. So where does it come up more? It comes up, there's a cork in my wine. Someone opens the bottle of wine, and even the great connoisseurs, depending how old the bottle is and the corkage and the cork, can get a little piece of the cork in the wine. So you pour your Kiddush wine, or you pour someone a glass of wine. There's a little bit of cork floating around on top of the wine. Now, you don't want to serve your guest, or you yourself don't want to drink wine with cork in it. What do? If you stick your finger in and grab out the cork, certainly if you're giving that to a guest, it's probably not the best way. If you want to use a fork, it's going to be borer. You're just taking the cork from the wine, which is soles from ochel. You're taking what you don't want from what you do want. So what do? How do you get the cork out of the wine? If you take a spoon and you take some wine with the cork, you're not in fact separating or sorting. You are indeed taking the entire mixture all together. Not everybody loves this. The Chazon Ish rejected this because the Chazon Ish said this is a harama. It's a legal loophole. Let's be honest. That spoon with the cork is not a mixture. It's cork. It has a little drops of wine there so you feel better. So, but other opinions, and we follow this, I follow this. Whenever I say we, I'm telling you what I personally do. That's the we. So we follow this, which is that if there's some cork in the wine, you can't just remove the cork. That's borer, biblical prohibition. If you take a spoon, you take out the whole mixture. Take out a little bit of wine with the cork. Take out the fly with a little bit of soup. Take out the whole mixture, and therefore you're not violating borer. So it's only a candidate to be borer if it's a mixture. If it's not a mixture, then you're going to be okay. I'll give you another example where if it's not a mixture, you're going to be okay. I'll give you another example. Yes, please. Yes, you can drink it and spit it out. Fast forwarding a little bit, you cannot violate borer in your mouth. Any separating or sorting you do in your mouth is not borer. Now, that sounds like a magic trick. Like borer, like you're not like, what are you doing in your mouth? That's not going to be borer. But think about where it comes up. Eating watermelon. What's the best way to take the seeds out of watermelon? So some brilliant group of scientists somewhere decided rather than cure cancer or diabetes, they invented seedless watermelon. That's not my joke. Seinfeld has a whole routine about which scientists decided that creating seedless watermelon was the urgent issue of the day. They abandoned other research in order to genetically engineer watermelons to not have seeds. I don't know who that was. God bless them. They did it just for the Jews so we don't violate borer. But let's say before then, or let's say you don't have seedless watermelon, you have watermelon with seeds. How do you eat the watermelon with seeds? So, according to some, you take a bite and then you spit out the seeds because with your mouth there is no borer. Let's say it's a choking hazard, the seeds. Let's say that's not so, the etiquette of doing that is not so great. So, according to others, you'd be allowed to remove the seeds right before you eat because there is no other way to do it. You cut open a cantaloupe and you want to serve cantaloupe. How do you get all the seeds in the middle out? You can't say, well, I'll take the cantaloupe from the seeds, the good from the bad. You can't do that. So a general opinion of the poskim is that when there is no alternative, then you are allowed to remove the bad from the good right before and without a vessel. So whether it's scraping away the seeds of the cantaloupe. Now again, we didn't get to this. The miyad immediately, I'm going out of order, but hopefully you'll get the whole picture here because this is a mixture this year. So hopefully you'll get the whole picture. So you're allowed to remove the seeds from the cantaloupe because there's no other way to get the flesh of the cantaloupe. But when? So let's say you're going to the 9:15 BRS Shabbos morning minyan, but you were up early. So you say, you know what? I'm going to cut up the cantaloupe for lunch now. And then I'll go to shul, 3 kiddushes, 4 bar mitzvahs, a bris, a scholar in residence, and then we'll have lunch afterwards. One thing I know, the cantaloupe will be all ready because I did it early in the morning when I woke up. No good. That's a violation of miyad. You have to only do it for right beforehand. If it's involving the prohibition of borer, you need the 3 criteria. So you could cut up the cantaloupe before Shabbos, or you could cut up the cantaloupe right before the meal, but you can't do it in advance. That would be a prohibition of borer. So there is no sorting in your mouth, be it if you're going to take a bite and remove the seeds. Where else does it come up? Fish. Fish is a big issue in halacha. Fish has tiny little bones. So some poskim say, good, so eat the fish and pull out the little bones. Many say that is a choking hazard. Many others say that is disgusting. There's a lot of reasons that you wouldn't want to do that. So some poskim, this is the origin of Gefilte Fish. The invention of Gefilte Fish was because of the malach of borer. Jews said, there's a big Indian to serve fish on Shabbos. It's a very mystical concept, the idea. Fish symbolically represents certain energies. So there's a very mystical idea of having fish Friday night, Shabbos day, different minhagim, both one carp, whitefish. What do you have? So Jews said, well, what do? We got a malach of borer. Can't sort and select, and all these fish have little bones, chutzpah. And on the other hand, there's a mystical idea of having fish. What do? The Jews invented gefilte fish. At least the Ashkenazi Jews invented gefilte fish, which is ground up whitefish and carp and whatever else goes into gefilte fish as a way of avoiding the malach of borer. So if you eat gefilte fish, you're good to go. If you're having a piece of fish that has the bones, some say put it in your mouth, pull it out in your mouth. There's no borer in the mouth. Others say you could use the fork in order to pull out the bones because they are a choking hazard and because there is no other way to do it. You can't really remove. Some say you should take the fork and hold down the bone and then pull the fish away from the bone. That's not really so realistic. I'm sure you've seen some people do that. It's not so hygienic, not so realistic. So gefilte fish is a good way to go. Or alternatively, again, many say because there is no other way to do it, you are allowed to pull it away. You are allowed to pull it away. Okay, so back to mixture. So we said the malacha of borer is only potentially violated with a mixture. If it's not a mixture, you're not violating borer. So to get the cork out of the wine, use a spoon. To get the fly out of the soup, use a spoon. What's another example of it not being a mixture? If you would eat or drink it that way anyway. So for example, a Brita water filter. If you have one of those water pitcher with a Brita water filter on Shabbos, I would have thought that is the textbook example of borer. You're going to fill it on Shabbos? How are you allowed to fill it on Shabbos? You hold it under the sink. The sink water is going to run in. It goes through a filter. And after it's filtered, comes out in the bottom. It's holding back the psolas from the ochel. It's holding back what you don't want from what you do want. And it's a kli. It's a vessel whose whole designation is to sort and select. To me, that would have been a textbook example. You're not allowed to use it. But I'd be wrong. The halach is you absolutely are allowed to use it. Why? Because since most people, and arguably everyone, even the istanis, even the people who overpay, when they come to the table and you say, I'd like water. And they say, would you like tap water or would you like bottled water? So even the people who say, I would like some bottled water, I don't look at the tap water. If they just came back from a jog or they walked to shul in August in Boca and they were very, very thirsty and they were handed a glass of the tap water, they would drink it. They would drink it. Almost everybody, if not everybody. So the poskim say that since everybody would drink water out of the tap, you just enjoy it more when it went through the Brita, which no one's even sure if it's really doing anything, but they do a great marketing job of convincing you it does. So it's not borer. It's not borer. So in other words, if it's not a mixture because I took out the whole mixture with a spoon, or it's not a mixture because I was willing to eat it when it was a mixture, i.e. the tap water before it went into the Brita, then it would be perfectly permissible. I'll give you a third example where it's not a mixture. One of the areas of borer is setting the table. Setting the table or sorting or selecting through silverware. You have a whole mixture of the silverware together. So how do you sort or select the silverware? How do you set the table? So one of the suggestions that's given, you're not allowed to hold a whole handful of a mixture of silverware after it's been dried, or you take it out of the dishwasher and you hold it and you then, let me take out all the forks, then I'll set a table all the knives. That's borer, that's selecting. Maybe you're doing it biyad and you're doing ocha from solas. It's usually not miyad, it's borer. So what do the poskim say? I take the silverware and I throw it on the table. And I scatter it on the table. And now it's not a mixture. So now I see them all separate and apart from one another, and therefore it's not a mixture. So there's no prohibition to nullify a mixture on Shabbos. There's a prohibition to sort or select through a mixture on Shabbos. So I can take out the whole mixture and throw it out, like cork in the wine. Or if I would be willing to enjoy the mixture the way it is, like water out of the tap, I'm even allowed to put it through a filter. Or if I have a mixture of silverware, I'm allowed to throw and scatter the silverware. Don't throw it across the room. I just mean gently on the table so that you scatter the silverware a little bit so that now when you take with the forks or the knives or the spoons, you're not taking them out of a mixture, but there is no mixture anymore. You've nullified the mixture altogether. What is the third? Third definition was miyad. We spoke about taking the good from the bad, which is subjective. Depends for you what's good and what's bad. And we talked about a mixture. How do you define a mixture? For me, the Aruch HaShulchan is the most compelling definition. He defines it as the eyeball test. If you look at it and it looks like a mixture, it quacks like a mixture, it's a mixture. If you're looking at it and it looks separate and apart, it's not a mixture. Why do I say this? Because the halacha goes through all kinds of analysis of these mixtures. For example, clothing in a drawer. Clothing can be called a mixture, depending how neatly folded and organized your closet or your drawers are. Many throw everything in, stuff it. If you can't see it, it's neat and clean. If you pull open the drawer, it's a big mishkabibble mixture. So how do you take what you want from it, take what you don't want from it? It could be considered an issue of a mixture. So how do you know what's a mixture, what's not a mixture? Books in a pile, they're a mixture. Books in the bookcase, are they a mixture? Silverware, when are they overlapping in a way they're a mixture? When are they separate and apart? Aruch HaShulchan talks about the eyeball test. If you look at it, it looks like a mixture, it's a mixture. If you look at it and you see distinct separate units, then it's not a mixture. So come back to the clothing case because it's a perfect example of miyad. We said you have to be meeting 3 criteria: not using a utensil, doing it for taking what you want from what you don't want, and doing it for immediate use. So let's say you're packing up the baby bag. You're taking the little baby to the park for a walk. You're going out for the afternoon, 2, 3, 4 hours. You're going to go to a friend's house. So you're packing the baby bag, several changes of clothing, because who knows how many times that baby will need to be changed. So let's say that clothing, though, is all in a mixture. When you're going to take out the next onesie, you're going to take out the next clothing, and it's all mixed together, that could be a problem of borer. That's not miyad. If you're going through to change the baby into it right then, so then it's biyad, miyad, ocha from solas. You're meeting all 3 criteria. The baby's dirty, needs to be changed. You go to the mixture of clothing in the laundry box or the drawer or in the baby bag, and you pull out what you want, then you've met all 3 criteria. But if you're taking from the mixture to pack the baby bag to go out for 3-4 hours to the park, that's not miyad. Now you're not doing it for immediate use, and you'd have a problem of borer. What if you're going to someone else's house? So someone says, could you bring the salad? We'd love to have you for lunch, but could you bring the salad? You say, sure. So you figure, you know what, I'll assemble the salad in my house before I go over to the neighbor's house. Now, salad could have a problem of borer. The outer leaves, if the outer leaves are rotten, the outer leaves are no good, and you're pulling them apart, you could have a potential problem of borer. The whole head of lettuce is considered a mixture, and pulling apart the rotten from the good is selecting or sorting. That's a problem of borer. So you're going to do it not with a utensil, you're good to go. There's no way to get to the good leaves without pulling apart the bad leaves, so you're good to go. But the third criteria of miyad is that called for immediate. So the halacha is, no, you'd have to bring the lettuce to your friend's house and assemble it there, because otherwise it's not miyad. Now you can either assemble it before Shabbos and then you're ready to go, but to do it at your house before you ever go to where you're going to have the meal is lacking that third criteria called miyad. That's too far in advance, and that's not called doing it for them. So how do you define doing it for immediate use? You have to eat within 1 minute, 5 minutes, 30 minutes? How do you define? So again, the poskim say, what's considered reasonable or normal for the next meal? What's reasonable or normal for the next meal? So clearly, if you're doing it before you go to shul, that's not for the next meal. On the other hand, in Boca, you could have meals that go on 3-4 hours. So you're going to sort of select before the meal for dessert. Dessert's not going to be served for 3-4 hours. Is that called miyad? The answer is yes, because that's for the upcoming meal, even if the dessert or that course of the meal won't be served until much later. It's also considered miyad if you're improving the food right now with it. So let's say you want to cut up a fruit salad, yummy, yummy, for the fans of the Wiggles out there. Anyone know the Wiggles? Nobody knows the Wiggles. Oy, the Wiggles, the great Wiggles. So fruit salad, so you're going to cut up the fruit salad, but the fruit salad, if you cut fruit salad and serve it immediately, it's not nearly as delicious as if the fruit salad can sit for a little bit, marinate and stew and enjoy the company of all these fruit getting to know each other. So in order to make the fruit salad to be optimal deliciousness at the meal, it means you have to prepare it this far before the meal. That's called miyad. Even though it's not right before the meal, it's the length of time that's reasonable to prepare it where it'll be at its optimal presentation, deliciousness for the meal. That is called miyad. So even this miyad, this third criteria of miyad, what's called right before the meal, has a certain level of subjectivity to it, and it depends what's called right before the meal. I'll give a couple more examples. I'm happy to take any questions. I could talk about borer all night, but the hour is getting late. So let me give a couple more examples. I'll take questions if you have any. You open a yogurt container and there's water on top of the yogurt. Can you spill it out? Tuna fish. It's a whole separate discussion. We'll do a midrashah later this year on how to open cans, packages, bottles on Shabbos, what you're allowed to open, not open, how you can open it. So leaving aside the question of how you open the tuna can right now, let's say you open the tuna can. So the minhag is to take the top of the can, push down on the tuna, and get rid of all the tuna liquid. So all you have left is the tuna. Is that borer? You're taking the liquid from the solid. Are you allowed to pour it out? What are you allowed to do? So both in the case of the yogurt and the tuna, poskim say, if you leave a little bit of the liquid with the yogurt or with the tuna, then you've not separated the mixture. You've left the mixture intact. So you're right. If you squeeze out every last liquid from the tuna, then you've pressed against it, you violated, you took what you don't want from what you do want, you turned the can into a vessel, an instrument of sorting, selecting, you're missing the criteria. But if you leave some liquid with the tuna, even if you spill off most of it, then you've maintained the mixture. As long as you left the mixture, it's not borer. So again, the premise, the prerequisite to borer is that there's a mixture. If you either take out the whole mixture or you leave the mixture, then you haven't done borer. Borer is when you've selected or sorted such that there is no mixture left at all. So the French press is a problem for other reasons. But what about pour-over coffee, like filtered coffee? So are you allowed to put one of those, has a name? Melita? Melita. Nice to meet you, Melita. Never heard of her. Okay, so you have this plastic vessel. It goes on top of a coffee mug. It has a filter. You put coffee grinds inside, and then you pour hot water over it, so then it drips. And you essentially have freshly brewed coffee on Shabbos. So the coffee snobs out there who, I don't drink instant, or I don't even drink the Starbucks V, and that's not for me. I need this. So the coffee snobs, can you have a drip coffee on Shabbos in that way? So the halacha is, is it borer? Why not? So the Gemara talks about this, not in the case of coffee, which was only discovered after the Gemara, but the Gemara talks about it in the case of wine and wine sediment. There used to be sediment in the drink, in the wine that they drank. So what if you had sediment, you want to pour water over the wine sediment to essentially flavor that water? Would you be allowed to do that? So the Gemara says it's a problem because the assumption there is that the sediment is wet. But let's say it were completely dry, like coffee, what do they call it? Coffee grinds? Coffee grinds. So the coffee grinds, so they're completely dry coffee grinds. So when you pour water over them and they drip into a mug, have you separated anything? No. Water went in and water came out. And nothing got separated. Just plain water went in and flavored water came out. Therefore, it's permissible. You do have to use a kli shlishi. Because again, remember, you might be cooking. The coffee grinds are raw. Unlike instant coffee, which was previously cooked. And ein bishul achar bishul, there's no cooking after cooking. But the coffee grinds are raw. So you have to use a kli shlishi to pour the hot water over it to make the drip coffee. But it would be permissible to make the drip coffee in that way. What about peeling bananas, peeling fruit? It's borer. It's a mixture of the fruit and the peel. So again, the poskim say there's no other way to get to it. So since there's no other way to get to it, it should still only be done miyad, right before you're going to consume it, and biyad. So can you use a peeler? Can you use a vegetable peeler? So Rav Ovadia Yosef says a vegetable peeler is just a fancy knife. He says, yes, vegetable peeler is not an instrument for sorting or selecting. It's a fancy knife. If you're allowed to remove the peel because there's no other way to eat it, then it's okay. Other poskim, most poskim say a vegetable peeler is the definition of an instrument for sorting or selecting. It is forbidden. But there are times you can use it. So for example, if you would ordinarily, you eat cucumber with the peel, when you're removing the peel, that's like the water in the water brita. Since you'd normally eat it with the peel, we don't consider that borer. If you'd eat the carrot with the peel, which I think fewer people eat, everyone peels a carrot. But if you would eat the carrot with the peel, then similarly, it's not considered a mixture. So there is an enormous level of subjectivity to the definition of borer, both the definition of a mixture, the definition of ochel and psolas, the good and the bad, and the order in which you need to take it. Okay, so see, these are some of the overarching ideas and some of the practical applications. Let's see, any other practical examples I did not get to? Any questions about borer in everyday life? Slotted spoon. Let me just talk about the slotted spoon. Is the slotted spoon an instrument for borer? So according to most poskim, it is, because it's not a regular spoon. If its goal was not to separate or sort, it would not be slotted. It would just be a regular spoon. It is slotted because it is meant to be selecting. So poskim say, if you have cucumber salad, coleslaw, and you put the slotted spoon so that people don't have all the extra liquid on their plate, to use it and hold it and let all the liquid drip out of it is a problem. But the Shmir Shabbos says that if you use the slotted spoon quickly, in other words, let's say you're too lazy to go get another spoon, or there is no other spoon, or somebody put the slotted spoon and you're a guest at their home. So if you use the slotted spoon in order to separate or sort, it's a problem. But if you use it as a regular spoon, meaning you lift and you serve quickly, then it wouldn't be a problem. So the Shmir Shabbos says the slotted spoon, again, there's some subjectivity to how you use it. If you use the slotted spoon as an instrument for sorting, it's a problem. If you use the slotted spoon to quickly serve, first of all, how could you say you sorted? You took the mixture. The very fact that you didn't stand there and let all the liquid drip out of the cucumber salad or all the liquid drip out of the coleslaw because you served it quickly means that you served the whole mixture. You didn't sort from the mixture, and therefore, according to them, it would not be a problem if you serve from it on the quick side. Okay, any questions? Yes.
On Pesach, it's Yontif, but it's still shop stores up until the point of separated.
Right.
On Yontif, but I remember growing up and people had nutcrackers and crack open nuts on Pesach, and that separated.
Correct. So first of all, Yontif has a little bit different laws. We didn't get into it tonight, but I'm glad that you're raising it. Maybe we'll do it at a different point in the future. Because on Yontif, Ochel Nefesh is permissible. On Yontif, there aren't 39 categories of creative labor. There are 38. The category of cooking is permissible on Yontif. You're allowed to cook on Yontif. So how does that apply to all the other categories? Let's say the borer is for the purpose of cooking. You're not allowed to shecht. You're not allowed to kill on Shabbos. But what if I want to shecht in order to be able to eat on Yontif? Then you would be allowed. So the other categories, in that they contribute to that category called cooking, are permissible. So how would you apply borer to Yontif? It depends. Things that you could have done before Yontif, you should have done before Yontif. If you can't do it before Yontif, or its flavor would be enhanced by doing it on Yontif, then it would fall into the exception or the exemption of Ochel Nefesh. You'd be allowed to do it on Yontif. Aside from which, even on Shabbos, you could crack open a nut. Because there is no other way to get to the nut, you'd be allowed to crack open the nut, and it would be permissible even to use a nutcracker to do it. Okay? Thank you very much for participating in the Women's Midrashah. Have a wonderful evening. Everything you wanted to know about borer and more.